bit later on. We ask you to submit your questions and comments through the chat feature. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end, but if there's something that pops up and you want to ask it right away, we'll answer it in the chat, and then we'll try to also we'll read it out loud to everybody when the opportunity arises. If you could please turn off your phones, and also it's perfectly okay. Asked to you these one of these sessions, somebody left the camera on and was folding her laundry while we were having the workshop, and she happened to be one of the squares that was on the recording, so you could go back and watch the recording and watch her fold all of her clothes. Multitasking is great, but feel free to turn off your camera if you'd like. It's okay. So now I would like to turn the workshop over to Cecile Murphy, who is the Chief of the Local and Nonprofit Assistance Program, who will lead us through today's presentation. Cecile?
Great. Thank you, Martha. And welcome to everybody. It's really great to have so many people on the workshop and to give you a lot of good information today. So as Martha may have mentioned, we have a couple of workshops today. In the morning, we talked about acquisition, and this workshop is park development, including urban parks applications and Green Acres park development applications, stewardship, and Jake's Law. On November 25th and December 18th, we'll be having Q&A sessions. These are drop-in, and there's no presentation involved. It's just if you have questions, please pop on and ask. We can answer questions at any time, though, so you don't have to wait till November 25th. Our project managers are eager and excited to help you and to guide you in preparing your applications in a way that you'll be successful. So I'll tell you at the end of the presentation how to reach out to them. Okay, so on the agenda, we're going to do an overview of all the programs I talked about. We're going to highlight requirements, tips, and also talk about updates since last funding round, and of course, answer your questions. This chart gives an overview of the 2025 funding programs. This chart and all the other information and charts I'm going to talk about and reference are all in the application packages. So no need to do a screenshot or anything like that. It's all in the application package. Applicants can submit one application for each program that they're eligible for. So our four main programs are traditional Green Acres, which is land acquisition and park development. There's also stewardship, Jake's Law, and urban parks. So whether or not you can apply for these depends on your eligibility, which is in that last column, the eligibility notes. We have park development in both traditional Green Acres and urban parks. The difference is the eligibility requirements for applying. So those I'll talk about in a little bit. I want to just note that when I talk about park development today, I'm mostly talking, in large part, anything I say applies to both the Green Acres and the urban parks park development. I'll note any differences later on. A lot of the park development information is also going to apply to stewardship and Jake's Law projects. If there's differences, I'll also highlight those. But if I'm talking about general requirements, they apply to everything. And even though you can apply for as many as you can, we do encourage folks to think about their capacity and whether you can actually administer the projects once, if you were to get an award for each of the ones that you're applying for, would you be able to do everything you needed to do to close it out within the 2-year project period? Okay, so park development, what can you build? What can you do with park development funding? On this slide is the official definition of the kind of projects that we can fund. Basically, it's anything you can build or rehabilitate, anything that is a facility that will be used for conservation or outdoor recreation. We do not fund indoor recreation facilities. Athletic complexes, passive parks, waterfront parks, trails, all of these are eligible projects. Support facilities are also eligible. So things like lighting, parking, even Wi-Fi, those are all eligible under park development funding. I will note that while a project can include support facilities, the primary focus should be recreation facilities. So you know, we'll fund a parking lot, but you should have a ball field or something that the parking lot is for, as well as the parking lot in your application. Eligible, some more notes about eligible projects. We encourage redevelopment of contaminated sites, so brownfields into parkland, greenfields. We'll pay for the investigation, but unfortunately we can't pay for remediation. There are other funds for those expenses. We'll hold the funding though, if you run into trouble, if you run into contamination that needs remediation, we will hold it as long as things are moving forward with the remediation process. We'll also fund structures, the construction of structures, as long as they are in support of outdoor recreation. So examples of structures are restrooms, maintenance sheds, concession stands, things that directly support outdoor use of the property for recreation. We have a requirement that you closely coordinate with our state historic preservation office if there are any historic structures that you're working with. And we'll help you figure out how to do that and to help, get you connected with them if that's the case. We require ADA compliance, so everything has to be accessible. And we strongly encourage exceeding the ADA requirements because in some cases they aren't actually all that rigorous. So we want our parks to be as accessible as possible to everyone. So we have helpful links at the back of our application, and there's some links there about how to increase your accessibility of your parks. You are required to identify permits before applying. It's really very, very important at the beginning of the project to assess whether your plans are compatible with the applicable regulations. We've had projects that have been delayed for years by permitting issues. So it's very important to get, to look at that right from the get-go. Some ineligible park development projects are indoor rec, as I mentioned, school sports facilities, and community centers. Okay, so park development projects, a few more notes, are limited to one park location, so no multi-parks, just one park. For large projects, like let's say you have a big piece of land, you want to put a very large athletic center on that property, but it's going to cost about $8 million, for example. We ask that you phase that project. Don't send us the plans for an $8 million project and request $8 million because unfortunately we would love to, but we cannot give you $8 million. So what we ask is that you phase the projects into manageable bits that we'll be able to fund, and then you can come back again and apply for the second phase, apply for the third phase, fourth, if it just keeps going. But this way, a usable recreation facility gets built in a short period of time, and then you can add on to it. We also have a rule that, there's no major scope changes to a project after approval. So if the scope changes significantly, the reason for this requirement is because it makes our process a lot less transparent and also less fair because we have a ranking system and projects are funded or not funded based on how they rank. So if you come in with one scope and then you change it to another, then that ranking doesn't have that same meaning anymore. So if a major scope change is anticipated, we will ask you to withdraw the application and reapply. So it's a very good idea to get your project scope really nailed down before submitting the application. All right, nonprofit applications. There are some special considerations for these. The first is a location requirement. Nonprofit park development projects must be located, and this is just park development projects. So nonprofit park development projects must be located in certain locations. So it has to be in a highly populated, densely populated, or urban aid municipality, or in a densely populated county, or they have to draw a supermajority of users from those areas. And what I just said may sound like blah, blah, blah. It's all in the application form. There are lists in the back of the application form of highly populated, densely populated, and urban aid municipalities. It's all laid out very clearly in the application package. That said, if you have any confusion or question about which type of location you're looking at, definitely reach out to us and we can give you a hand. Nonprofits are also required to submit an eligibility certification form. There's a number of attachments to that, including an IRS website printout, a Charities Registration and Investigation Act website printout. I will say, particularly for the CRIA, the state website, please check early. Their website is not always up to date. And so we advise our applicants to check really early and advise and see if you need to resolve any problems. If it says you're not compliant, we won't be able to fund your application. So if you check very early and there's a problem, we actually give instructions in the website, in the application package on how to resolve those issues and who you need to contact. So if you're a nonprofit, I would put this at the top of your list to do, is make sure that the IRS and the CRIA websites, and there's instructions in the application about how to check those. Make sure that those two websites show that you are eligible and that you are compliant. And again, any questions, reach out to us and we can help. There's public contracting requirements that normally don't apply to nonprofits, but for our funding, we ask that nonprofits do comply with them. So those are the local public contracts law and prevailing wage. And there's detailed information about that in the application package.
If I
Okay.
can just, before we
Yeah,
get to
go
that,
ahead.
I just want to read 2 questions that we've gotten already. One is, if you receive funding this year already, can you apply for more funding for the same project or a new project? Yes, you can ask for supplemental funding for the approved project, assuming it's been underfunded. If you're asking for supplemental funding and want a new project, it needs to be in one of the other categories that Cecile mentioned before, the stewardship or Jake's Law, or if you're eligible, the urban parks. The other one is this presentation going to be available for viewing after the conclusion of the meeting today? Wouldn't be today, but yes, we're going to post this one and this morning's on the website, hopefully this week. What is the deadline for the application for 2025? When will awards be made? Okay, we will get into that, but the deadline is February 5th, 2025, and we're hoping if we can do it the same as this past year by that Earth Day. Oh, the questions are popping up now. Can you use land on community centers to create outdoor usable space, or does it have to be on a separate location? I'm not sure I understand.
Like there's a community center on the same park that you want to build the outdoor rec, I'm guessing. And that's fine. Yeah.
But it has
as long
to
as
be,
it's
yeah,
outdoor rec.
Good, yes. But we do encumber, and I think Cecile will talk about this later. We do encumber the land that we help fund. And so if there's a partial, if there's a community center or a senior center or something else that's really not parkland on a piece of property, and then we build the park next to it, we're not going to encumber the building if it's held for some other purpose. If it's next to the library or next to whatever, it's the site. So it could be a partial lot that we're funding, but not for the community center itself. That's correct. We cannot fund the community center. We don't do any indoor recreation. Okay, go ahead, Cecile.
All right, synthetic turf. We wanted to highlight some additional requirements for synthetic turf applications. It's a very hot topic. Green Acres does prioritize natural turf, but at the same time, we recognize that some applicants feel that synthetic turf best meets their community's needs. So we have asked our Division of Science and Research to research issues that are connected to synthetic turf fields. Over time, they've done this a few times. Their memos that are based on their research reviews are in our application package if anyone is interested in those and wants to review them. But based on their findings, we are going to continue to fund synthetic turf, but we are asking applicants to do a bit of due diligence in their project planning. So you can see on this slide that there's a number of issues that we're requiring applicants to look at in due diligence reviews. So drainage, the actual materials that are used in the fields, heat impacts, exposure risks, And also anticipated life and replacement costs. I will note that Green Acres has a policy, actually it's a regulation that we can refund the same facility, but 20 years have to pass except for certain exceptions. So artificial turf warranties are usually about 8 to 12 years. So you can see there is a gap of, at the least 8 years between the warranty and when Green Acres would fund a replacement. So that's important to know going into a synthetic field, that conversion is that we may not be able to fund that replacement. So just that's one thing to keep in mind among all the other things, because there is a number of issues that are connected to synthetic turf. So we're asking applicants to look at all of those things and to, review all the information, weigh the potential benefits and risks, and make an informed decision for your community. We also are asking that the governing body, if it's a town or the nonprofit, look at the difference between the synthetic and the natural and discuss why a synthetic turf field is preferable or necessary in your community. Then we are requiring that after doing all that research and that thinking and that review, that you share all that with the public. It's very important. I mean, all our projects, it's very important to be transparent and to engage the public, but synthetic turf is a particularly, it's a controversial topic right now, and people want to hear what their town is thinking about, and why that choice was made. So we explicitly require that any synthetic turf field that is proposed is discussed with the public. It should be discussed during the public engagement process and definitely at the public hearing. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Just as a side note, I just want to note that all Green Acres funded facilities must be open to the public. And sometimes with synthetic turf fields, people want to fence them off because they're very expensive and they don't want people to be on the fields if it's not being used for a scheduled game. But for a Green Acres funded project, that is not appropriate. We require regular, unscheduled public access, so time that the public can just come and use the field. So those are some issues in regard to synthetic turf fields that we just want to stress. They're all in the application form again, but I mean, basically we'll approve both synthetic and natural turf fields if all the requirements are met, but we want you to do the due diligence and talk to the public about your choice. Tree removal. So
can I just,
yes.
So I just want to bring up one thing because it's going back to something. I'm not sure. I apologize if you mentioned this, but someone asked the question about, can you address proposed changes for 2026 park development nonprofit location requirements and when they may be posted in 2025? Did we talk about?
I did not mention that. No,
okay.
Because I'm just talking about this round. But if you want to talk about that for the future,
yeah, I mean, in the future, we do intend to make nonprofits able to apply for park development funding statewide, not just in those densely populated or urban areas. But that is going to require, we're doing rule rewrites right now. And so that change is not ready yet, but we're hoping to do that in the future. Okay, and then another question.
Oh, sorry.
No, so one more question. On a previous page in this presentation, I saw limit to one park location. We have a large park that needs renovation and has a tiny tot lot playground in the same block, but not adjacent to the main park. This required 2 separate applications. If
they're adjacent lots, no, it can be all the same.
If it's all one park,
yeah.
I mean, some parks are very large, but if it's the same park, it can be seen as a cohesive project. What we don't want are multi-parks with basically multiple.
If the park all has the same name, it's all good.
That's right.
Of course, in Philly, Fairmont Park is like enormous and goes everywhere, but we're not there. So I think most of our parks are pretty contiguous.
Okay, good.
Okay, are we ready? Okay, tree removal. So we have a focus at DEP and the state on our climate resilience efforts. And as part of that, we are really looking closely at tree removal. Trees have a very important role in carbon sequestration. And we don't want part of DEP's mission to be contradicting another part. So we are looking very closely at tree removal in our park development projects. And part of this is that we ask applicants to provide really detailed information about any tree that is being proposed to be removed as part of a Green Acres funded project. You can see the kind of information we're asking for. And we do want to just stress that projects that propose significant tree removal are not going to be funded. So we're not saying you can't remove any trees, but public engagement in particular on tree removal, very important because it can be very controversial. And sometimes it's just not going to be a good fit for our funding if there are too many trees that are slated to come down. All right, what will we pay for? Basically, we'll cover all costs that are necessary to create or restore a park, except remediation and applicant salaries. So we won't pay for DPW labor, for example. We'll pay for construction, engineering and supervision, which is capped at 13%. Environmental assessment work, either the PAR, if there's site investigation, we'll pay for that. Permit fees, demo, if necessary, and incidental costs. And those are things like, legal fees or advertising, stuff like that. Okay, this chart, which is also in the application package, is all of the grant percentages for park development projects. And I will be the first person to admit that this is complicated. We try to make it easy to figure it out. And the reason we have so many different categories is because we're trying to help, different types of projects and to promote different types of projects. The first step in trying to figure out how much money your project might get is to figure out what category applicant are you? Are you a standard municipality? Are you a highly or densely populated municipality? Are you a highly populated county? Are you a densely populated county? Are you an urban aid municipality? So that's the first step. And all of those are lists at the back of the application. And in the appendices, they shouldn't be difficult to figure out. Unfortunately, nonprofits don't even make it onto the list just because nonprofit projects by statute are always 50% grant. So there's no complications with those. They're not complicated, but it's 50% for all nonprofit projects. And that's acquisition, development, stewardship, everything. Local governments are more complicated because not only are there these different categories of local governments, but we also give local government applicants preferential funding for projects that benefit environmental justice communities. And I'm going to talk about that now. So in the state, the Environmental Justice Office, using the environmental justice law, has identified census blocks. So these aren't towns, they're census blocks that are considered overburdened communities. And within that subset of census blocks that are overburdened communities, there's a subset of overburdened communities that are subject to adverse cumulative stressors. And what that means is that these are census blocks that have experienced a greater than average burden of environmental and public health stressors. So some of these stressors include things like sources of air pollution, contaminated sites, solid waste facilities, scrap metal, landfills, sources of water pollution. And the EJ office has mapped all these, and they have overlaid them with the overburdened communities and identified basically those communities that need the most assistance because they have had the most environmental and public health strains on them. So for our purposes, Green Acres projects that are located within one of these, I'll just nickname it ACS OBCs, that are easily accessible from one, are eligible for higher grant percentages. So, and it's an increase of 25%. So if your park development project was normally eligible for, let's say, only loan funding, if it was located in an ACS OBC, it is now eligible for 25% grants. If it was eligible originally for 25, then it would be 50, et cetera, et cetera. Easily accessible has a very specific definition. It's less than a quarter mile away from the ACS OBC with no barriers to pedestrian access. So it can't have like a big highway running across it or a river, for example. And when we say a quarter mile, it's not as the crow flies, it's a quarter mile using GIS, mapping out the roads that a person would take or the pathways that a person would take to get to that particular site. There's definitions in our application for this stuff, and there's a lot of great information on the Environmental Justice Office website that is hosted on through the DEP website. Okay, and coming back to the same chart that I had up earlier, the grant percentages, the second part of the process of figuring out what box you're in is once you know what town you're in, then you figure out whether your project is in the ACS OBC. And there's 2 steps to doing that. The first is that you look at the list in the back of the application. So in the back of the all of our applications that it's relevant for, there is a list of all the municipalities in New Jersey that contain at least one ACS OBC. So that just because your town's on that list doesn't mean that your project is in an ACS OBC, but it's a good first step. So if your municipality is on that list, the municipality where your project is located, because this is true for counties or municipalities, then at that point, then you need to look at the map. You need to look at the EJ map. And there's detailed instructions at the end of the application package on how to look that up, how to find out whether your project site is in an ACS OBC. You can also look it up just to see if it's near, if it's in that quarter mile with no barriers to pedestrian access, if it's easily accessible from. And those instructions are very step-by-step, very easy to follow, even for people like me who are technologically maybe a little challenged. But if you struggle with them and you're not sure, or if you just want confirmation, please reach out. It's important to us that our applicants have accurate information in the planning stage. So we're happy to answer questions all the time. I mean, that's our job, and we would much rather answer them before the application comes in than to have to call someone and say, oh, you thought it was this, but it was actually that. So please reach out to us.
Cecile,
Yes.
we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
First, somebody asked, does a park need to be Green Acres identified, or can it be any park within a municipality? If not a Green Acres park, how long does this process typically take to gain the title steps involved? It does not have to be, the park that you want to help develop does not have to be a park even yet. It doesn't have to be Green Acres protected or funded or anything. It can be new land or something else or vacant or anything. It does not have to be a park. This will turn it into a park. Another question was, would a nonprofit in a project located in an urban municipality be eligible for 75% or 50%? All nonprofit funding by statute is 50%. There's nothing we can do about that. So we encourage, and you get points for projects that are in urban municipalities and such, but the funding is limited to 50% grants. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so any project that is not eligible for a 100% grant needs matching funds. And there is, here's a list of potential matching fund sources. There's, this list is in the application package, in the appendices of the application package. There are helpful links, and some of them are potential sources for matching funds. So we encourage you to look at all that. The one thing I really am happy to talk about is something new this round, is that we are now offering 0% interest loans for all Green Acres projects. In the past, we've had 0% interest for projects in urban aid municipalities only, but now we're expanding that to any project anywhere that Green Acres funds. So that is one way to match our grant funding, is to apply as well for a loan in the same application. And some applicants are only eligible for loan funding, but now that loan funding is going to be 0% interest.
I just want to clarify one thing. Generally speaking, we don't provide the loan funding for planning incentive projects. I think that would just sort of wipe us out if we fully funded those. So so any project for which we can give loan funding, it's 0%. but we don't guarantee the loan funding. It's going to depend on available funds. We award grants first, and then we see what's left and who asked for loans, and then we go from there. I just want to make sure that we don't guarantee the loans to everyone.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, we also asked another question. Could
Yeah.
you use volunteer hours or indirect as match?
There's only one category of Green Acres funding for which volunteer hours are can serve as a match, which is nonprofit stewardship projects. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But normal park development projects, no matter who the sponsor is, volunteer labor is not a match that is accepted by us. And local government stewardship is also not accepted. So it's really just that one type of project and that one project sponsor. Stewardship projects that are sponsored by a nonprofit.
Okay. And we have, can you apply for playground improvements that may not necessarily be fully compliant with Jake's Law? Absolutely. It just would not be in the Jake's Law funding category. It would be regular park development. And also, are nonprofits eligible for loans? No, just 50% matching grant. Sorry.
Okay. Is there another one?
Actually, one just
Popped in.
if application is accepted but loan not given, does that make the application not eligible? No. I mean, my point was only for like say certain projects that maybe you ask for a ton of money, and we're going to talk about caps actually right now. We may only be able to give you the grant portion and not the loan because it would exceed the cap, or there's some other reason. But no, the eligibility and approval are one thing. Once we figure out you're eligible to be approved, then we decide how much we can give you based on all the requests and the amount of money that we have. That's all I'm saying, is that we might not be able to fully fund your project with a loan as your match. So you have to be ready to provide the match if we can't give the loan.
Okay. So those are all the good news. The more sort of sobering message is that funding percentages may not tell the whole story of how much money you will actually receive if your project is approved. That was just what Martha was talking about. In particular, more expensive projects may receive less than they're eligible for. So you might be eligible for a, let's say 75% grant, but we set funding round caps every year in order to help spread the money around. And just because the demand for our funding is so high, and it routinely exceeds the supply of money, so we have to cap our awards. For Green Acres projects, the cap is based on applicant type, and I'll show you those in a second. This is important. It's very important that applicants design a project, whether it's park development, Jake's Law, or stewardship, that reflects your likely award plus available applicant funding. So it's what you're likely to get from us, which I'll show you a slide in a second, plus what you have on hand or what you're anticipating getting from others. Do not apply for a project that was going to require funding from a subsequent Green Acres round. So don't apply saying, okay, I'll get this much money from Green Acres this year, and then we'll need more, but we'll apply for that more next year. Apply for what you can accomplish with the funding that you are going to have this year and this round if you're successful. Don't submit what we would call a wish application with a large project scope and a huge price tag if you can't afford it. The entire project scope must be completed. So you can't apply for 4 ball fields, for example, and then only construct 1. And that, again, is because of transparency and our rankings and fairness. Again, I'm going to reiterate this, if the scope significantly changes after the award, we're going to ask you to withdraw the project and reapply for a smaller scope. So phasing is a wonderful thing. Phasing larger projects. So if you have a big 4 ball field and you can't afford to do all 4 with the amount that we're going to give you, apply for 1. Next year, apply for the next one, or apply for 2. So be realistic when you're doing the project design, or when you're deciding how much of a large project you're going to include in the Green Acres application. And here is a chart that shows the funding round caps from the last 3 funding rounds, with the highest numbers having been awarded in our most recent round. And as you can see, it depends on the type of project sponsor. And again, these lists, so figuring out where you stand in these different categories, they're all in lists at the back of our application. It's very unlikely that we'll make awards and have funding round caps that are outside this range significantly. So you can use these for planning purposes. So, look at what you're likely to get, look at your funding grant percentage, and then figure out how much money you need and how much money you have, and go ahead and plan the project that way. I'll just make a note about nonprofit projects. We don't have a set funding round cap. We haven't for a couple of years. Our awards for nonprofit projects are based on demonstrated need, past performance, and overall demand for that funding.
Cecile, we have a
Yes.
question about a related question. Does that subsequent funding include a loan request, or would this be in addition to the loan request? If I'm reading this wrong, please correct me, Steve, but we want you to apply for a project that you're going to build with the award that we give you. If you ask for grant and loan and we can only give you the grant, you have to commit to providing the balance. Now, the following year, if you're underfunded, you could ask for additional funding, loan or grant, but we're not going to let you hold your first project hoping to get more money. So that's what's happened in the past. People have tried to accumulate funding because they came in for too much, and then the money just sits there and we get in trouble. So the grant loan approval, if you're asking for everything and we can only give you partial funding, you need to commit to the rest. It doesn't mean that next round you can't come back and ask for supplemental funding on it, but that's got to be like a bonus, not what you can't rely on it because to move ahead. We're going to try to get you to start the project right away that was approved. If I'm not understanding the question correctly, that answered my question. Okay, good. Okay, go ahead, Cecile.
Okay. All right, I'm going to now highlight some differences in the Urban Parks program. So this is a separate application, and Urban Parks applications are for acquisition, development, and historic preservation. I'm specifically going to talk mostly about park development in this case. The main difference, as I mentioned before, is the eligible applicants. So all local governments are eligible to apply if they meet the criteria. And that's urban aid municipalities and county governments. So it's actually not all local governments, it's urban aid municipalities and county governments are eligible to apply. The project that they apply for must be in an urban aid municipality, and it also must be within or easily accessible from one of those ACS OBCs we talked about earlier, the overburdened communities subject to adverse cumulative stressors. The purpose of these requirements is to focus our urban parks money in the hardest hit areas, the areas that have the most need for open space and recreation facilities. And in the application, in the back of the application, there is a list of urban aid municipalities that contain at least one ACS OBC. So again, you would look at that list, and then if your town is on that list, then or the town where your project is in, if you're a county, you would then go to the EJ map and see if the ACS OBC contains, if there is an ACS OBC that contains your project, or if it's easily accessible from. The funding for urban parks is 100% grant funding. There's no match. New this round, we have had funding round caps in the past. Since we started the urban parks funding about $500,000. We are going to lift that cap this year, and we're going to determine the cap after we get all the applications and we know how much money we have and what the demand is. So go ahead and ask for, whatever your project is going to cost. And, again, please don't ask for a $5 million project. It's very unlikely that we would do that. So try to keep it within around the same range as the Green Acres caps, but don't be afraid to ask for more than $500,000. There is an option when you apply to urban parks to request that if your urban parks application is unsuccessful, you don't get any money from urban parks, or underfunded, like you get some money, but it's not enough, you can request the application is rolled over into the Green Acres round. So in other words, you're applying in the same round for the same project to both urban parks and Green Acres if you elect to do that rollover. The Green Acres submission, the rollover submission would then count as your one Green Acres. And the application lists the different extra requirements for if you're going to ask that it be rolled over. Just as a reminder, urban parks projects, just like all the other Green Acres projects, are required to have meaningful public access at the project site. Okay.
Okay, let me
Mark,
just, just a
questions?
couple things. First, I do want to clarify one thing. It sounds like we're talking about a lot of focus on urban areas and these adversely stressed, overburdened communities. We of course we fund projects all over New Jersey, park projects all over. We do give preferential funding, grant percentages to those hardest hit and the neediest towns. But also, as a separate thing, the urban parks funding is not Green Acres funding. It's a special set aside from the state budget that is called urban parks. So we needed to create the program to meet what the legislators wanted through the budget. So it's a separate pot of money apart from Green Acres. So we didn't want to complicate it and make it very different from ours. So we're using it that way. But that is actually earmarked for urban areas, just so you know. But the rest of Green Acres is, we put the money everywhere. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Martha. I think that's a good point to make, that we're here for everyone. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about our stewardship program. This program funds projects that are focused on the creation, restoration, and protection of natural resources and historic landscapes. There's two main categories of eligible projects for our stewardship funds. There's creation, restoration, and protection of natural resources areas, which includes areas such as wetlands, meadowlands, woodlands, and there's historic landscape restoration. And again, this is landscape, so it's not historic buildings, it's the landscape. And it's only for properties that are listed on the New Jersey or the National Historic Register. And so that's a very specific requirement for those projects. Improvements for outdoor environmental education, nature observation, and public access, such as trails, interpretive signage, eligible. There's a detailed list in our application package of examples of eligible items and then ineligible items. Please review that list. And we're asking this year, actually, we're requiring for the first time that you reach out. Anyone that is thinking of doing a stewardship project must reach out to your Green Acres contact to confirm eligibility and review funding. We've had a number of applications for stewardship projects that were somewhat wish projects, as in they wish the stewardship projects had the same funding, that they could fund some park development items, but they don't. There's a line between stewardship eligibility and park development eligibility. And we just don't want folks to get their hopes up to get stewardship funding only to find out after they've applied that the things they're applying for are actually park development eligible, not stewardship eligible. So that is going to be a requirement this round, that you reach out and confirm that what you're planning on applying for is actually eligible.
Cecile, can someone ask a question about that, about dredging a pond because it's turning into a wetland?
It basically, pond restorations, we've had a number of applications for them. We prefer if it's part of a larger project, that there's other, maybe there's stream bank restoration or plantings around the pond. And the dredging has to be part of a larger project, and it also has to be documented to be done for ecological purposes. We actually had one where someone said it's ugly. We're doing it for aesthetic reasons, which I can understand. Nobody likes an ugly pond, but it needs to have that natural resource restoration aspect. So we will fund it if there's that nexus between what is being done and improving the environment.
Another question was, does HAB mitigation fall under this category?
Again, I think that would.
Well, that's a little bit more complicated. I think we'd want to talk
Yeah.
to you because that's also, it can be seen as maintenance. And
Yes.
stewardship, where by statute, stewardship can't be normal operation or maintenance of a site. So we need to talk about that to make sure that just restoring this pond, whether it's going to be successful based on other things that are happening around it. So that's one we would definitely want to talk to you about it. We're not saying yes or no immediately, but that's a unique one and we'd like to talk to you about it.
And the stewardship program comes up with a lot of those. We have this detailed list, but we've had quite a few requests that we've had to, really look at the legislation, look at the purpose, and make a call. So that's why we're asking you to do this all up front before you, go in and do a whole application. Let's have that conversation. So please do contact us about the HABs. We'll talk more about that in details.
We have a couple other, can a plan design for a restoration project be funded? And not yet. We're working towards doing planning grants in the future, but right now what we're funding is the work itself. I mean, there's some planning minor planning that has to go into it, obviously, and some of that would be part of your professional services, but not a plan per se, sort of as a standalone. But we are working towards that later on. The other question is, could a municipality apply for a stewardship grant and a Jake's Law grant? Does applying for more than one decrease the chances of being awarded? No, we do not hold it against you if you are actively trying to make your town better.
In multiple ways.
In multiple ways. And we do look just, I don't know if we're talking about it yet or not, but there may be people out there, communities and nonprofits out there who received letters from us saying that they have too many open projects because we are not funding municipalities or nonprofits that have 3 or more active open projects. Again, as Cecile said before, the capacity, we want to make sure that you can handle all those projects. So we gave them 6 months notice, actually more than that, to try to close some of those projects before the funding round. For counties, it was 5 or more open projects. We wanted you to close some before you apply for additional ones. So we can approve more than one. I mean, the chart that Cecile put at the beginning of the presentation, there were 4 different categories. So in theory, you could get 4 projects this round. So we want to make sure you could handle those and you don't have too many open projects otherwise. But otherwise, no, we think it's great. Can someone apply for both Urban Park and Green Acres? Yes. Again, in that chart, and that chart is in the applications, all the applications, the different categories of funding, you can apply for separate applications. Okay.
The only thing you can't do is you can't apply for Green Acres acquisition and Green Acres development. You can't ask for supplemental funding for example, a planning incentive project and apply for a development project. You can do one of those traditional Green Acres and any of the other ones. You can do urban parks, you could do Jake's Law, you could do stewardship, and either the acquisition or development funding request, be it supplemental funding or a new application.
And one other thing, we wouldn't apply in the same funding round, even if you come in with different projects, different categories, we won't fund the acquisition of a parcel and the development of that parcel, because obviously then you couldn't start the development until you own it, and that already is putting you behind, later in the process. So we couldn't help you do an acquisition of the same site, even if it's an urban parks acquisition, and then do a Green Acres development of that piece of that parcel because you don't own it yet. Okay.
Yeah, I do suggest strongly that you read the eligibility sections of any of the applications you're considering applying for. So, there's an eligible projects, eligible applicants, eligible activities, all those things are laid out in detail. And if you have any questions on them, please do reach out to us. Okay, so much of the information that I already went over for park development projects is also applicable to stewardship projects. So no multi-parks, no major scope changes. You have to fill out the tree removal form. They have to be ADA compliant. And the big difference is that there is no location requirement for nonprofits. So nonprofits can apply to do stewardship projects anywhere in the state. There's not limited location wise. So stewardship funding, the eligible costs are the same as park development. The grant percentages are much more easy to figure out. It's basically 50% for almost all projects, be it nonprofit, local government, doesn't matter if it's in a ACS OBC or not, that doesn't apply to stewardship. The only difference is that if it's in an urban aid municipality, it's eligible for 75% grant funding. There is a minimum request for stewardship funding. Unfortunately, we cannot process a bunch of really small grants for stewardship. We just don't have the resources. So we have a minimum request of $50,000. So that for a 50% grant project, that's a $100,000 project. I will give a shout out to ANJEC. If anyone is interested in doing a small stewardship funding stewardship project, ANJEC does have a program where they give like little mini grants to applicants to do those really small stewardship projects. So, I do encourage reaching out to them or checking out their website.
Just to be clear, that's the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissioners, ANJEC.
Yes, and the link is in our helpful links at the end of our application package. The funding round caps for stewardship funding are the same as for park development. So, you could look at those and again, design your project to be consistent with those caps.
Okay, we have a stewardship question. The stewardship list of ineligible projects includes parking areas, but ADA accessibility is eligible. Can ADA parking area, usually local code requires this being paved, connected to the trail, be eligible for stewardship?
That's I think we need to see the project. And if it was eligible, it would need to be part of a larger project. So not just the parking. It could be the parking and the trail, or hopefully some, invasive species removal, something that is connected to the natural resources. But I don't know, Martha, do you have thoughts on that?
It kind of depends on if you're talking about how the distance of this paved trail from the parking to the natural resource aspect of the project. So I think we would want to talk to you offline about that, Alan, if you wanted to run that by us.
Yeah, just to reiterate, definitely reach out so we can have those one-on-one conversations about the stewardship projects due to their complexity. Okay, moving on to Jake's Law. We are happy to share that our Jake's Law Playground pilot project is back. These are projects that create inclusive play spaces with facilities that exceed the requirements of the ADA. They're either replacing an existing playground and making it, completely accessible, or building a whole new playground. Both of those we fund. The bad news is this is the last round that we're going to have a separate Jake's Law application program. So this is the last hurrah. We have always funded accessible playgrounds, and we're going to continue to fund accessible playgrounds after this round, but it'll be through our park development funding. And so this year is the last year with the incentivized funding, which I'll go over, and without any competition. These are not competitive, these particular projects. Okay, I'm going to go over some of the requirements. Counties and municipalities are eligible to apply. Nonprofits are not. This is just a local government program. Even if your county or municipality has previously received a Jake's Law funding award, like last year, the year before, you're still eligible to apply this year. This is our last hurrah. We want to get as many of these playgrounds awarded and built as possible, all across the state. They must be constructed. This is not a normal playground project. They have very specific regulations that DCA, the Department for Community Affairs, issued after Jake's Law was passed for completely inclusive playgrounds. There's capital C, capital I, capital P. those regulations, as I mentioned, are very specific. They're in the application package, so please read them carefully. One thing that is not just playground equipment. There are a number of other requirements for these playgrounds, things like fencing, shading, in some cases retrofitting of restrooms. So there's a lot more than just the playground equipment that applicants should be aware of when preparing the application. These are going to increase the cost. These playgrounds are more expensive than a normal playground. And so it's on purpose that we're doing this particular funding round program for them. And the purpose of these increased costs and these increased requirements is to allow all the kids to play. And that's regardless of physical abilities or neurodiversity. There's a reason for each of the particular requirements in the DCA regs. So please, when you're doing the application forms and packages, please make sure that the project description, your concept plan, and your cost estimate all include each of those required elements. So fencing, for example, please show the fence on the concept plan. Please write fencing on the cost estimate with a particular cost. So that way we know that you are aware of and you are incorporating all of these requirements into your planning and into your funding request, because you don't want to get a funding award and be like, oh, well, I have to do a fence, but I didn't get money for the fence. So all of it should be in the project description, the concept plan, and the cost estimate. There is a frequently asked questions that's in the cost estimate that one of our staff prepared that's really helpful, particularly for the issue of restrooms. That one we found last year that really caused a lot of questions. So please check out that frequently asked questions. I will sort of give a quick and dirty on the restrooms, which is if the site where the playground will be located is currently served by a restroom, people who go to that part of the park have a restroom that they go to, that restroom needs to have a family restroom, and it can't just be a stall, it has to be a separate room. So there's a lot more details in the application, particularly in that frequently asked questions. And I encourage you to look at that. And then if you still have questions, obviously, definitely reach out to us. The other thing about Jake's Law projects is that it's just for the Jake's Law improvements. So let's say one of your parks, you want to put an inclusive playground, and then you want to put a skate park in the same park, or, refurbish the ball field. You can't include the ball field or the skate park in your Jake's Law application. That has to be a separate application. You want to do that other improvement? Great. Just submit a separate park development application for just that portion of the improvements. So you do end up submitting 2 different applications, but we can fund both aspects of it. Okay, the eligible costs are the same as park development. The grant percentage, and this is what I was talking about, the incentivized funding, it's 75% grant for all projects. So it doesn't matter where you are in the state, what kind of sponsor you are, because it's only local governments. And it doesn't matter if it's an ACS, OBC or not, it's 75% funding for everyone. We have anticipated awards, kind of like our funding round caps. Counties are anticipated to get between $750,000 and $1 million, and municipalities between $500,000 and $750,000. We are hoping to award on the higher end. We have done that in the past 2 rounds, and we're also hoping to fund everybody. The award amounts are going to depend on demand. And if demand exceeds supply, we're going to use relevant factors such as disability demographics and proximity to other inclusive playgrounds to select our projects that we're going to fund. Hopefully it won't come to that. We're really hoping on funding everything. We did last year, we did the year before. So we're hoping to, round out our Jake's Law pilot program by funding everyone who applied to us if they were eligible. There's a streamlined application. There's no ranking. You don't have to fill out a narrative. And like I said, we hope to approve everybody, and it is our last year. So please, please, please apply. We want to see as many of these built as possible. Any questions on Jake's Law? No? Okay, now that we've covered eligibility and funding, I want to talk
I'm
about
sorry,
some.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah?
I forgot to unmute. I was saying, yes, we have a couple of questions, but I forgot to unmute.
Okay.
So going back to stewardship, somebody said if a parcel is already in a USDA stewardship program, but we would like to expand trails and grade roads to improve access, would this still be eligible? And I responded in the chat that I'm not sure what the USDA project issue is, and we could talk about that offline, but grading roads would not be eligible, and the trail aspect we discussed has to be part of a larger natural resource program. So I suggest that they reach out to us, to the project manager who's assigned to their area to discuss it. And someone asked if interpretive signage could be bilingual and yes, cover Spanish or bilingual accessible signage. Sure, we encourage bilingual and great communication and all this, and all the good education. If the playground, now we're into Jake's Law, if the playground area is part of a bigger park that has a fence, does the playground area also need to be fenced in? And I said the DCA dictates the fence and safety requirements. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess it would depend on how far away the fence is that you're talking about, but I think it really needs to be around the playground equipment itself. But DCA rules would dictate that. So we could talk about that.
And just to add into that, the DCA rules are ultimately interpreted by the town's code official because they're part of the UCC, the Uniform Construction Code. The DCA regs amended the Uniform Construction Code, which is enforced by your local code official. So that would be the person to ask about it. I will say that the purpose of the fencing in a Jake's Law in the Jake's Law requirements is it's often for neurodiverse children because sometimes they have a tendency to wander. And so that fencing is to keep them safe. So that's one thing to keep in mind about the fencing.
Okay, can you apply for Jake's Law funding if a municipality has more than 3 grants open?
Yes.
We are trying, yeah, we're bending over backwards for Jake's Law. And then can a park development application be for repair and maintenance of an existing facility, such as a public pier that requires new timber pilings?
I wouldn't call it maintenance.
Yeah,
it wouldn't sounds like a refurbishing. We don't fund maintenance. Maintenance is like, painting your fence or something. Replacing pilings is refurbishing, and we would fund that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be that. I mean, it's not just, it's not really going to be competitive if you're replacing a couple of planks. But hopefully some of that, it's part of a better waterfront access project. And certainly some of those pieces of wood is that's not the be all and end all of the project.
Yeah, you have to look at what the recreational opportunities you're creating or refurbishing, what user groups you are appealing to and catering to. You can look in our ranking, which is called like the narrative outline in the application, and that gives you a really good idea of the types of things that we look at when doing the ranking. So as Martha said, a simple project for one thing may not rank very high.
Okay, we're caught up. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to highlight some of our application requirements and tips to help you submit a successful application. So just like what we're talking about right now. And these, again, apply to all of our applications. They apply to park development, Jake's Law, and stewardship. So the first of them is our requirement for public engagement. We are really focused on meaningful public engagement through our improvement projects. We found that it's really important. I mean, of course, from the get-go, it ensures that people who have input on how their tax dollars are spent, which is always nice, particularly if you're a public entity. But we found it helps our applicants make better projects. If you talk to the public and they tell you what they want and what they need, then you can design a park that meets those needs. And it can meet more needs. So even if, like, for example, the soccer league wants a new soccer field. If you open that discussion up, you may hear from the senior citizens, they may say, well, put a walking path around it so that we can get some exercise. So there you're already making that park more usable and serving more of your community. So that's what we've seen, is that they, better projects come out of these dialogues. We've also found that for a number of different types of park development projects in particular, if you don't involve the public early on, it can lead to controversy later on. So, for example, if there's little public engagement in the beginning, like let's say you hold a meeting, but you don't really advertise very well and nobody shows up, then you go ahead and you have the application submitted, we approve it, and then everybody finds out about the project. And then for whatever reason, different communities have different things that they don't want to see or they do want to see. It can really turn into a large controversy. And ultimately, we've had quite a few projects withdrawn because of that dynamic. So we are trying to not waste our time and money and your time and money. Actually, it's not really our money, but it's, you guys put money into doing an application and you put time into it, and we want it to come out. We want these projects to be successful. We want them to be successful and beloved by your community. We want community members to really love their parks and feel a sense of ownership and a sense that they helped create them and gave their opinions. The sort of outcome of all this is that we've gotten more specific in our public engagement requirements. We looked at which ones were successful. And so we identified 3 categories of public outreach. There's community surveys, community meetings, and invitations for community input. And we are asking our applicants to do 2 out of 3 of those. And just to go over some notes about them, community surveys can be online or they can be on paper. It can work out nicely if it's on the website or if it's linked from social media. Also, you can have it available for less tech-savvy people at public buildings and public events. So at the library, the municipal building, the rec center, the senior citizen center, trying to get those different demographics, school functions. And then things like street fairs, any sort of community event is a good place to get that input, and either the invitation for community input or having a formal survey. Surveys must have open-ended questions. We actually got at least one last year where they just did their entire plan and had, do you like it? Yes or no. That's not okay. That's not really a survey. It also must be conducted early. All of this public engagement needs to be done in the project planning process. So we're not telling people what we're going to do. We're asking people for input and then deciding what to do. And you may have an idea of what you want. I mean, it's rare that there is an applicant that doesn't have a thought about the type of project they want to apply for, but just keeping an open mind, like I said about the soccer field, like what else could we do at this park if that soccer field is something the community wants? What else can we put in there that will make it a park for more people than just those who play soccer? The survey has to be well advertised. It has to, and the application has to include the survey results. So you can't just tell us you did a survey and give us a copy of the survey. You have to tell us what people said. You have to summarize the results and let us know, what the input was. For community meetings, they can be online. They can be in person, they could be on site at the park, or they can be elsewhere at the municipal building, for example. It could be an open house, they could be focus groups, whatever you think is the best way to get the input of community members and a broad spectrum of community members. The invitations for community input, their feedback opportunity. So it's not that different from what I was talking about for the survey, just more informal than having to fill out a survey. So, for example, having a table at a park that you're thinking of redoing, just having someone sit out there with plans or, maybe a list or just talking to people. I see you're at this park. What do you think this park should have? What do you think this park is missing? Or what do you think we should focus on refurbishing at this park? Those conversations. We had one applicant last year. They just did a phenomenal job. They actually had a nonprofit that they partnered with who went to the park, and they had bilingual volunteers, and it was in a bilingual community, and they brought surveys. They did have surveys, but then they actually walked up to the people at the park and the neighboring housing community and asked them and just filled out the survey with them. So, I mean, they definitely got park users to fill out that survey. And, not everybody has to go to quite those lengths, but that's the sort of thing that we want to see. And that's the sort of thing that's going to make a park that those people are really going to love and use. So it's possible. We've seen, a number of really fabulous examples of public engagement. And so we're just trying to encourage more of that, more meaningful engagement. And this, definitely reach out to us if you have questions about this. And we may have ideas or thoughts about how you can do it for your particular type of project. For Jake's Law projects, we encourage trying to find, and engage members who are going to use that playground, whether it's, the disabled community, the neurodiverse community, or just general kids, because these are inclusive playgrounds. They're for everyone. So the idea is, again, we're not just telling people we're doing, we're asking for input, and then we're making our plans. And we're not just asking the rec commission or one or two sports leagues. We're engaging the general public more broadly. With all that in mind, we do have a question in the application about how the results of the planning engagement process were incorporated into the project design. And that's an important question. And, the answer may be we really tried hard to get input, but nobody gave us any. And if that's the answer, that's the answer. But we do want you to try. We want you to try hard to get that input and get that engagement. And finally, I'm just going to stress a couple of things. First, the public hearing is not public engagement. There's been a lot of confusion about this in prior rounds, so we're giving it its own slide. And I just want to stress that applications that do not demonstrate meaningful public engagement will not be eligible for funding. And that's efforts, public engagement efforts, because obviously you can't guarantee that your public will engage, asking the multiple opportunities to do so. And this is our fun drawing of a kid's idea of the perfect playground with the roller coaster. So you can engage kids too. We definitely have had projects where kids have drawn their ideal park, and that has been kind of fun as well. Are there any questions about public engagement?
No, but there are some that are from before. You wanna? Okay,
Sure.
so does Jake's Law cover soft costs? The answer is yes. The application will detail which ones and any caps, but then all the PS was such as prevailing wage. And I said that's not really a soft cost. That's built into the bid and the construction costs for the contract that you're going to award. And then if we have a playground that we intend on applying for funding as phase one, would it be necessary or recommended to include other phases of the park development? And that depends on the playground. If it's a Jake's Law playground, there is no ranking, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you're going to be trying to do things that are beyond the Jake's Law playground, as Cecile said before, that would actually require a separate application, because the Jake's Law special funding is just for that, everything associated with the playground. So you would want to apply for something, for a different application if you wanted to do, but if you wanted to do a regular application, a regular playground, not Jake's Law, then you'd want to beef it up, because just a playground alone would not be enough to be competitive. So you would want to put other facilities in there to make it competitive. And then somebody said, oh, I apologize, I joined late. Will artificial turf continue to be funded, and what other options for unitary surfaces are acceptable outside of poured in place? So the answer to the first one is yes, we will continue to fund artificial turf, but you should go into the application, because there are a series of requirements that you must fulfill before we'll consider the application, because we do prefer We do prioritize natural turf, but we understand that sometimes synthetic turf might be best for your community, but we need you to do a lot of due diligence before we'll fund it. And what other options for unitary surfaces are acceptable outside of poured in place? Oh, does DCA's regs don't specify that, right, Cecile? They just say poured in place, or they just say
They just say
unitary surface?
unified
Yeah.
surfacing, unitary surfacing is what
Yeah.
they say. It does
So-
not define what that is. So I would talk to your code official, because again, they will be the ones to interpret the regulations because they're part of the Uniform Construction Code.
Okay, and then for stewardship grants, does providing more than the required match percentage for a project increase the likelihood of being awarded? In a way, because it means that your project is going to contain more facilities. If it's going to be more expensive, you'd think it's because it's a bigger, better project, which might get bigger, better scores. So it's not so much that you're giving more than you need to, it's that you're proposing an ambitious project and you understand that even if we don't fully fund it, you're going to pay for the rest of it, but it's still going to be a really great project. That would probably have more points.
And if you're
Okay.
getting additional funds from other sources, that also helps with the ranking. We consider that in the cost effectiveness section of the ranking criteria.
Okay. Does unitary surfacing mean no wood chips mulch surfacing?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay, we're caught up. You can keep going.
Okay. All right. So we've talked about public engagement. Now I'm going to talk about the public hearing, which is different. Remember that slide with the not equal sign. So through the years, we've had numerous questions about our public hearing requirements. These are old, the public hearing requirement has been around for a long time. This slide shows some new and updated requirements for the public hearing for the notice. So before the public hearing happens, you have to notice it. You have to tell the public that you're going to have it. These are all in the application. There's actually a checklist for the public hearing, all the aspects of the public hearing, the notice, the hearing itself, and the minutes. And there's actually a new checklist for nonprofits for the public notice requirements, because nonprofits are not required to hold a public hearing. And if you have any questions about these, we can talk about them at the end. These are requirements for the hearing itself and the submission of the meeting minutes. I'm just going to highlight a few of them. At the public hearing, you must present the project description, the concept plan, and the environmental impact statement to the public in detail. You must discuss any tree removal, and if you're proposing a synthetic turf field, you must go through each item on the synthetic turf addenda to the environmental impact statement. It's very important that you do this, and it's extremely important that you're clear in the minutes to the meeting that all of this happened. Otherwise, your project may not be eligible. For applicants who have meetings earlier than 6 p.m., we've had some folks who asked about that 6 p.m. hearing, 6 p.m. or later hearing requirement. Let's say your meeting starts at 5. That's fine. Just hold the hearing at 6 or later. So do your other business up front and then hold the hearing. And be clear in the notice that that is when the hearing is going to start. So the notice should say the meeting will start at 5, the public hearing on this topic will start at 6. Transcripts instead of minutes are fine. If you want to, if your town does that, that's fine, or your county. No video or audio submissions, though. We just don't have time during the application review period to go through those. And as I mentioned before, I believe anyway, for urban parks, if you are going to be requesting rollover to Green Acres funds, then you must discuss that in the public hearing and mention that you discussed it in the meetings. Okay, our enabling resolution requirement, please use our template without changes. Problems happen if lots of changes are made. If there is a discrepancy in the amounts between what's listed in the resolution and what's listed on the application form, whatever's in the resolution is going to be used. So try to make sure that they match. If it's 100% grant project, you can put the match as 0. If there's no loan request, you can list the loan as 0. You can contact us to review the project cost and the request figures to make sure that they are correct. And if you are filling out those numbers, the match that you are required to give in the resolution, the total project cost minus the funding request has to be that match. So the match plus the funding request has to equal the total project cost. I probably should have put it that way. It's a little clearer. So you're keeping in mind your funding grant percentage, you're keeping in mind your loan request. And basically the important part is that you are reaching out to us with your draft resolution. It's not a requirement, but it is strongly recommended. The enabling resolution is an important required part of the application package. And our project managers would so much rather read your draft and give you feedback than to have to tell you after the applications are submitted that it's not quite right. So please do reach out and talk to your project manager, shoot them a copy before you have the enabling resolution passed, and just to make sure that everything is okay. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're doing an Urban Parks rollover, there's an optional paragraph that must be included in that enabling resolution.
Lucille, if I can,
Yeah,
if I
go
could-
ahead.
a couple of questions. Actually, the answers to both is kind of the same. Someone asked if the lists that you had referenced or mentioned in the application, I'm not sure what lists they were, but everything that Cecile is talking about today is in the applications. She pulled out things that we get a lot of questions on, but every single thing that she's talking about, every bit of information is in the applications. The other one was you stated public hearing meeting minutes need to include 3 things: project description, environmental impact, and blank. Missed the last one.
Concept plan.
Concept plan. But again, these will all this information will also be in the application. So don't worry about missing anything. Okay.
And
You're
I
caught
am
up.
the queen of checklists.
Yes. Yes, that's
I
right.
have been crowned, and they are all in there. There's a bunch of checklists. It's very detailed, and the idea is that you know, to give you as much guidance as you can to really be to be able to submit a complete and successful application. That's what we want, and that was the goal in making the application package as dense and as full of information as it is. And if it's too much, just call us or email us. I mean, we're available. We like it when people contact us ahead of time. When we get sort of mystery applications that show up on the deadline day, I mean, we accept them, but we're always like, oh, did they know what to do? Like, did they do everything right? So it's great when we hear from you ahead of time. That's really, that's our preference. And so don't feel like you're bothering us. We want to hear from you. Okay, so I know we don't have that much time left, so I'll try and be quick. So ranking, this is a competitive program except Jake's Law, which is not a competitive program. We love it when we can fund everyone, but a lot of times our demand exceeds our funding, and our programs can be competitive. You know, it can be the difference of 1 point whether you get funded or not. And we want you to be successful. So we are very clear in the application what our priorities are, and we have some suggestions about how to design your projects to incorporate them. We recognize that not all of our priorities are going to be met in every single project, so that's fine. But you know, the more consistent you are with the priorities outlined in the application, the more likely it's going to be successful. Disqualifications. We hate disqualifying projects, but it does happen. In order to be ranked and compete for funding, the application must first be deemed eligible. We're not even going to rank it if it's not eligible. The application package lists circumstances that will lead to disqualification. We've talked about a few already. I'm just going to highlight a few more. Signatures, very important. So please make sure that the right people sign the application. The public hearing and the public engagement, again, very important. I've talked about that. And then, you know, there's some niche things, like if your facility was funded by Green Acres less than 20 years ago, and you're asking to refund it or to put something else in its place, then that's an issue. We need to talk about that. Reach out to us as soon as you realize or you suspect that we funded that less than 20 years ago. Or if you're not sure, reach out to us. Site work without a usable recreation facility, not eligible. So check out that list just to make sure and reach out to us with any questions about that. Okay, just a few notes about supplemental funding requests. If you have a project that you need supplemental funding for, either, let's say that you went to bid and it came out more than you expected, for example, you can submit a supplemental funding request form. Now, these supplemental funding request forms are for acquisition projects, Green Acres, park development projects, and for stewardship projects. Jake's Law projects are not eligible for supplemental funding, and urban parks projects are not eligible for supplemental funding through urban parks, but they may be eligible through Green Acres. And that's something you should reach out and talk to your project manager about. There are two versions of the supplemental funding request form. There's the acquisition one and the development one. Please make sure you're using the right one. There's also different versions of the attachments. So there's an enabling resolution that's required for each supplemental funding request. And there is a nonprofit eligibility certification form that's required if you're a nonprofit. And there are different versions of that. If you just use the ones that you click through from the supplemental funding request form, you'll get the right version. And this year we're requiring that all supplemental funding requests, just like all new applications, must be submitted through our portal on our website. Okay, submissions. You must submit a complete application or supplemental funding request by the deadline, and that is February 5th at midnight. There's a little confusion in the application package. I apologize for that. Some places it says 5 p.m., some places it says midnight. It's midnight. Although please finish by 5 and then go have a nice dinner. In terms of what's complete, there are checklists in each of the application forms. If everything is checked off and nothing says NA, unless we specifically say that it can say NA, then you're good. It's complete. All application materials must be submitted by that date, including the public hearing minutes. So please don't have the public hearing the night before. It can be, if you have to, you have to. But what we suggest is to work backwards, is to figure out the date of the governing body meeting first, and then figure out when everything else must be done for that meeting. And this goes for nonprofits too, because, some nonprofit boards only meet quarterly. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're doing your application planning. And for the governing body meeting date, please pick one that if something goes wrong, there's time to have another one. We've had ones where there was a snowstorm, where someone in the town passed away and the funeral was that day. We've had all sorts of things like that. So please try to pick one where if you have to reschedule, you can. And I just want to say that overall, all of these requirements and all of the little picayune things in our applications, they help us. They help us review your applications faster, and which helps us get our recommendations out, which helps the money get approved and appropriated faster. And all that is to try to shorten that timeline and to get you the money quicker. We got about 180 applications last year. We're not that big an office. And if the applications are complete and have everything, we can go right through them like that. So that's just a little background about all the requirements we have for the applications and why. Okay, here is our portal. This is how you submit. So you go to our application, you go to our website, you go to forms and regulations, and then you click on application submissions. And down near the red arrow, it says upload application forms here. You click on here, and it brings you to a menu, not a menu, it brings you to a form that has drop downs and fill-ins. And once you do the drop downs and the fill-ins, you upload your files and you press submit and you're good to go. If you have any questions about that, if it's confusing in any way, just reach out. There are instructions on the portal to what to do if there's an error message that you get back. But you can always call and just confirm that it came through as well. Give us a couple of, give a little bit of time before you call, just to make sure that we have time to receive it, because it doesn't go straight from the portal to us. There's a little delay. Okay. And I know I've said 5,000 times that we would like you to contact us, and this is how. This is a lot of information that I've thrown at you in a short period of time. And the application materials really do cover all of this stuff in detail. So they are a good resource, but we also have wonderful project managers who are a wonderful resource. So to figure out which is your person to reach out to, go to our website, njgreenacres.org, go to the Contact Us, see the red arrow there? And then click on Local Nonprofit, and you'll see there's a column for acquisition projects, and then there's a column for park development and stewardship. That also includes Jake's Law. So be sure you're getting the right column person for each county, because we do, for most counties, we have a different person who does acquisition than does park development. So make sure you got the park development contact. And of course, you're welcome to attend our upcoming Q&A sessions on November 25th and December 18th. Just want to give a quick shout out for our new listserv. This is not necessarily application related. This is a listserv for any kind of communications Green Acres wants to put out there, including application stuff. At the bottom of our homepage, you can enter your email address and sign up to receive updates and alerts from Green Acres. So please sign up. It's a great way to hear from us. We also have social media, thanks to the young people on staff. So that, you could also check our social media. I think we have Instagram, right? That's our social media. So thank you for coming so much. I know it's been a long presentation, and I appreciate you guys hanging in there. And if anyone has any questions, we are happy to take them now.
Yeah, we're not going anywhere. We'll stick around to answer your questions, but we have a couple that were in the chat. Somebody asked, and I love this question, do we give priority to applications that come in before the 5th? And I said, no, unfortunately not. But we really recommend that you reach out to us as early as possible, because in a way it will give priority, because if you ask us questions and we give you guidance, you will submit a better application, which is more likely to be successful. So we don't give you points for being early, but we could help you improve your application if you talk to us well in advance. And then someone said that your application states end of life recycling for the turf, carpet, and infill is available and should be explored. To my knowledge, artificial turf cannot and is not being recycled per folks at DEP Waste Division. Do you provide a list of verified recycling of artificial turf? I don't think we have that. I think we want you to explore it, because things change and we're not the experts at that. But as part of deciding whether or not you want to do synthetic turf, we want you to anticipate the fact that you are going to have to replace this and do something with the existing infill and carpet. And that should be taken into consideration when you're planning this project. So if recycling is not possible and it has to be disposed of in a different way, that's fine. But the burden is on you to figure that out. We just want to make sure you take that in consideration when you're trying to decide whether or not artificial versus natural, which way to go. So that's something, we don't have a list like that. Was it mentioned that there is a qualified vendor list? If so, where do we find that list? I assume that means for Jake's Law playground equipment. And that's just the regular municipal and state vendor list that your purchasing agent would probably be able to tell you where you can and from whom you can get quotes and make purchases like that. Wonderful talk. Thank you. Great information. Okay. Again, please raise your hand. We're not going anywhere. We can stick around for a little bit. But if you have questions, just raise your hand and we'll answer them. But we really appreciate you coming and hope it was helpful. Or you are free to go. I mean, the class dismissed if you'd like. But if you do have questions, we will stick around for a while. Are there slides or information as follow-up to this presentation? We are going to be posting the recording. Actually, Amy, if you could just stop the recording. I don't think we need it for this part. Are there the slides? We'll try to provide the slides